Okay, welcome everyone to this session. For those of you who are in the previous session, it's probably a nice segue into just tapping into one of the themes that they made about what are the key ingredients for a really successful development. And I think we are here to suggest that maybe the tenants, the ones that pay for the space, to occupy the space and use the space, is probably one of the most important ingredients in any development. So we're here to present the side of the occupier, whether it's an office building, retail or industrial. So I'm Jess Pruden, I'm the Divisional Director of Strategy and Consulting at Roll Occupier Services, and our side of the business is focused purely on representing tenants. In a lot of countries, well, pretty much every country across Africa, the markets are traditionally dominated by landlord representation. We're flipping it on the other side to make sure that the tenants are represented professionally as well. So the organisers have just asked me to do a very brief presentation just to kick off, and then we'll hand over to the panellists for the discussion. So what I'm going to talk about is the result of some recent research that was done, similar to some of the themes that were presented by Marla this morning. This is 2017 research, and it's looking purely at the EMEA region. And it's looking at what do corporate real estate professionals think about, what are their strategies, and what are the challenges that they're trying to find solutions to. So if you look at the key challenges that the corporate real estate professionals are operating in or are facing, obviously the big one is economic uncertainty, and this being a largely European-based research. Obviously Brexit is a big issue there, but I think you could argue any country across the world faces its own economic uncertainties. So those are the top 5 that were identified. The biggest mover, the biggest, the fastest growing challenge is that one, number 4, the technology disruption. And this is both in the way that people work and the way that buildings and real estate can be managed. So all of these challenges are really about linking the market to the business, and with real estate being the facilitator of that.
She's pressing back.
That's stuck on a loop. Okay. There we go.
She's pressing back.
There we go. Okay, so how are occupiers dealing with these challenges? And their strategies are mainly based around cost reduction, aligning with business, and really facilitating business. And a big part of that is the talent attraction and talent development. So it's connecting the people and the business and the performance. So how are they actually achieving these strategies? So some of the things that we've been working on a lot with a lot of our clients are how do we drive efficiencies? So it's in how space is utilised, how space is occupied, and then what do we do with the surplus space? So it could be disposing of it, subletting it, and then looking at the space that the tenants do need, and how do we optimise this? So it could be renegotiating leases, looking at CapEx and OpEx, initiatives, and obviously FM comes into it a lot as well. But the really important thing here is to make sure that any corporate real estate strategy is aligned with the business. You can't have 2 completely different sets of objectives working against each other. Okay, this is so at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve is better collaboration for the business to improve productivity, to drive cost savings, and to make sure that the business is agile and flexible and able to adapt to those economic uncertainties. So with the technology disruption that we spoke about, there's a couple of different ways that this can be looked at. technology. So there's two different channels to this. So the first is, how do people work? And there's really a big rise in obviously things like flexible working and co-working spaces and shared offices. And I think the guys on the panel will touch on these and how these are potential solutions, even more important solutions in the rest of Africa. And also in how do you manage your real estate? How do you get the information that you need to drive decisions? Okay, so at the end of the day, what occupiers are really looking at is how to drive cost savings and how to introduce these initiatives without detriment to the business strategy, making sure that they're aligned and working together, and how they can use innovative technologies to actually drive efficiencies, optimise their utilisation, reduce energy costs and so on. And how the changing preferences of their workforces, how can we adapt to those in a cost-effective way? On the flip side, what this means for investors, expect your tenants to be taking a much more active approach to their real estate requirements. It's obviously a huge cost to their bottom line, and they're looking for ways to make it work smarter for them. Understand the labour markets in your locations when you're looking at decision making for entering new markets, because that's certainly what your tenants will be looking at. And look at the potential return on investment in smart technologies, and look at ways that you can structure this so that the investment and rewards are shared between yourselves and your tenants. And make sure that your buildings are adaptable, because the ways that your tenants are working is changing, and so your buildings need to be able to adapt to this as well. Okay, so that was a rather messier presentation than hoped. But, so from there, I'd like to introduce the panel. So we have Sebastian Bruno from Siemens, we have Khair Chiber from EY, and Nena Alinta, who is from Roll, Nigeria. So I just want to kick off, just give each of you the opportunity to introduce your business, just to talk about what your company does, the sectors in which you operate, your footprint in Africa, and just your general strategy for the rest of Africa. So, Sebastian, start.
Thank you, Jess. Well, Siemens should be well known in the building industry. The new claim is we are doing electrification, automation, and digitalization. So that is basically the threefold product range we are offering. In Africa, so I'm overseeing the corporate real estate side for Siemens, not the building technology side. In Africa, we have a fairly small portfolio compared to the rest of the world, roughly 75,000 square meters, mainly in South Africa and in Nigeria, and the rest is basically scattered around smaller locations in predominantly East Africa. From a market approach point of view, we of course are going where our business is, where our customers are, be it in energy infrastructure, mobility. So wherever in Africa a new pipeline is coming up and we are part of the project, then there's a project team from Siemens coming in. Wherever a larger mobility project is coming up or a new mine is coming up, wherever our products can be used. So from a real estate strategy point of view, that puts us in a requirement of needing flexibility in the first place, especially in volatile countries. Because ramping up large operations for white elephant projects where you have a project team of 50 people in, but only for 3 years, doesn't make sense for you to invest in larger real estate structure. So keeping the structure and the portfolio flexible is one requirement, keeping it cost effective as well, and ultimately supporting our project teams, our workforce, ideally with the required infrastructure.
Thanks, Jess. Khair Chiber from EY, Ernst & Young. So we're a professional services business, assurance advisory, tax, consulting, but as Jess said, technology and I think digitalization is changing all of that. So where we used to be auditors, we now provide all sorts of different services to our clients. The business is changing. There's a lot of conversation on digital technology, automation, robotics and those sort of things that's changing the way we work. We used to employ aspirational chartered accountants or chartered accountants. Nowadays we employ engineers, climate change sustainable services specialists. We employ computer engineers and a variety of other people. So it's really changing for us. And as a result, our client base has also moved quite a bit. From an Africa footprint point of view, we have a presence in most African countries. So we've got about 50 offices in about 30 countries. The portfolio isn't that big. We only have about 70,000 square meters of office real estate space in Africa. The bulk of that is in South Africa, as you can imagine, where we have a huge office just opposite the Gautrain. And then it spreads to locations ranging from 5,000 to 4,000, 3,000, and some locations as small as 100 or 200 square meters, depending on the client need. We have, over the last few years, completed about 15 either relocation, refurbishments, or new build-out projects in Africa, from places like South Sudan and Juba to Rwanda, Kigali, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Abidjan, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and so forth. We're busy with a few projects at the moment. And I think the reality is that we typically, as I said, follow our clients. Our clients are a variety of industries, but we find ourselves often, much like Siemens, entering a market where we start off with a very small contingent, 10, 15, 20 people. And it's really difficult for a business like ours to establish ourselves in a location where, quite frankly, the landlords are not, the market is not a tenant-friendly market. The landlords have a specific way of doing things, and you end up in a take-it-or-leave-it scenario. The buildings aren't really appropriate for what we're looking for. It's not the right specification. It's often not in the right location. It's often triple net leases, which are the worst things for tenants to deal with. We want gross leases. We're not good tenants in the first instance. We're really bad landlords. So we don't want to look after our own buildings. And then it just perpetuates. We've got, from a real estate point of view, EY globalized our real estate function in 2009. Real estate is the second biggest cost item next to our salary bill. So we're not in manufacturing, we're not in supply chain or anything else. Real estate is our second biggest expense. And when we started in EMEA, we averaged about 14, 15 square meters per person across Europe, Middle East, India, Africa. We were able to reduce that to about 8 square meters today. Since 2009, we've kept our real estate costs globally flat at about $1.2 billion over 7 years, including new build-outs, including inflation, including new capital expenditure, and the likes. And we've implemented specific strategies. We initially started off with a cost play, looking at density and occupancy cost. We then evolved that into more of a design play. We started something called Workplace of the Future, but you can only run Workplace of the Future for so long, then it becomes the past. So we had to rebrand and reorganize that. And we now call it EY at Work, which was launched last year. And as a result, our focus has moved from cost to density, or cost to design, and now from design to experience. It's all about the end user experience. It's all about the tenants. It's all about our people that we want to attract and retain. And quite frankly, given the nature of our business, we need to make sure that our staff and our employees are hugely excited and happy about where they work. And that's the key thing. We've seen a huge move from the old corporate office space to what Jess referred to, more WeWork, co-work type space. It looks and feels a lot more like Google, but Google is also no longer the colorful stuff that we used to see. I think they're slightly bringing the pendulum back to something that's more traditional. But the fit-outs and the designs that we do today feels a lot more domesticated. And my analogy for that is the airport lounge meeting the coffee shop. It's that kind of look and feel. And a lot less space is owned by the people, a lot of that's more shared. Technology is a huge piece of that, and we see this moving even further forward. So there's a whole bunch of things that we look at when we look at different locations, but I'll pause there for the moment, otherwise I'll keep on talking for the rest of the afternoon.
Hi, my name is Nana Linton. I'm head of corporate real estate services for Grow Nigeria. And though I'm not a corporate, my experience has been in corporate advisory and real estate advisory for a lot of the multinationals in Nigeria. I think with our partnership with CBRE and having had a presence in Nigeria for about 15 years, we're the biggest corporate real estate services provider in Nigeria. And I think it's been interesting times for me. I moved back to Nigeria about 5 years ago with Ericsson. And at the time I moved back, we were looking at an office strategy for their head office in Lagos. And we went from looking at what was available in the market, and there were literally 2 options available for Ericsson at the time. One of them being under construction, and the other one demanding $1,000 square meter rentals in B-class quality space. Fast forward 5 years, in Nigeria, we are now in a market that's oversupplied. We've seen rental levels drop year on year over the last 2 to 3 years, about 15%, 10 to 15% across the core markets of Lagos in Victoria Island and Ikoyi. But I also have a unique experience in assisting one of our bigger clients, Standard Chartered Bank. I head up an account where we manage their portfolio across sub-Saharan Africa, so assisting them on transactions and asset management, where they're located in about 15 different countries, 2 million square feet of assets spread across office and the retail branch market. And in addition to what Jess has said and what we've heard from the 2 corporates here, there's a drive for optimization, a drive for cost reduction, and digitization in terms of and this has had an effect and an impact in terms of the space requirements and what they're looking at in terms of solutions. But one of the things that I've also seen, which has been good, is that in the last 5 years, we've seen a move by corporates to centralize their corporate real estate teams. So they're looking at data on a global level. They're looking at benchmarking rentals. They're benchmarking cost per person, cost per square meter. They're benchmarking the amount of space they occupy per person. And they're also looking at, in the markets that we're in sub-Saharan Africa, governance is very important. So you go into a market that's very unsophisticated and very immature, and you're expecting landlords to, follow through with the long laundry list of requirements that you have. And I think what we've seen is leases taking longer to complete, just in terms of from the start of finding a property that actually meets your requirements to closing out that transaction. But it's a learning curve, and we're seeing that landlords are starting to come on board and understanding the requirements from multinationals in this area.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question to look at. How do you enter a new market? I mean, what is your approach? I know you guys are looking at a few new markets. I mean, what drives your decision making? Do you have the information you need? And how do you deal with the newness of a new market?
Well, if you can make a decision, that is very good, because in some of the markets, at least the experience I have made in the last couple of months, where you have a completely intransparent real estate market where you have no data at all, there's actually not really a decision to be made, because it's take it or leave it, as put it in some cases. We just made the experience in Sudan, where we entered the market after lifting of the sanctions. And with quite a big project coming up, so we were looking at establishing a branch office. Siemens operates with branch offices, so not with local companies in a sense. But there you sit, Googling real estate rental levels in Khartoum, Sudan, and you get 0 hits. That puts you as the head of real estate for that region in a quite difficult position, because your customer tells you in 2 months, we have a project team flying in from Germany, the branch needs to be established, and by the way, it would be great if they have some desks to work at. So I ended up basically contacting the German embassy in Khartoum to find out, do you know agents in the market? How does the market actually work? How did you get your embassy space? And he was telling, the economic attaché was telling me a horror story of the embassy landing their real estate deal and whatever went wrong there, so that basically was very encouraging. Additionally to that, intransparency of markets, if you are working for a multinational, the compliance aspect is a huge one. If you're operating in a country, Sudan, on the high risk list for money laundering, you need to know where your landlords are, and if you cannot find that out, and if they don't want to disclose your bank account details or whatever, then you again end up with nothing. And after several attempts, we found, in the end of the day, out of pure need, an individual who we finished the vetting process with, so private landlord basically, who lives in Dubai and London, and we rented an apartment which was somehow suitable for office use in the proximity of the German embassy, because at least there I had my security needs fulfilled. So basically that is the kind of trade-offs you have in the end of the day, if you have an urgent need. So coming back to your question of what would a corporate help to enter such markets as Sudan, South Sudan maybe is the same example. Ethiopia, we're facing not exactly the same but similar challenges. So every real estate market which is not yet that mature, it would help tremendously of having kind of a safe haven where you know that the company or the landlord is operating cross borders, they know how to deal with a global corporate, they know what compliance requirements they need to fulfill, and they don't answer, or they answer questions in regards to bank accounts and so on, to actually let you finish that vetting process. Ideally in a serviced office infrastructure, so that your 2-people team, which is coming there for site establishment and then being ramped up to 20 or to 30 or to 50, depending on the project size, can be hosted right from the beginning with an IT infrastructure ideally and with some kind of services around. So basically the kind of serviced office concept, not the Regis type of thing, and I don't mean to offend anyone from Regis who might be in the audience, but basically giving you a cubicle on the floor with the look and feel of the 1990s and somehow used up furniture is not really what a corporate would look like. Because what I also often find is you have either European prices on African quality, but what we are actually looking for is African prices for international quality from a space point of view. And that is a challenging thing because I think with most corporates, or multinational corporates at least I know of, all of those new investment decisions are not being made locally, they are being made ultimately, in the end of the day, or at least co-approved by some form of headquarters. And if you then come with an investment application stating net rents of $50 plus 10 installation allowances and what, then you first of all get a lot of question marks and say, well, that is not comparable, benchmarking, we heard it before. So that puts you in a difficult position as well. So because then you start explaining that, sorry, TIA, but that also not always counts. So yeah, safe haven and value for money at the end of the day. And ideally a partner which we can work cross borders. So with a certain footprint in the region, we have a growth initiative in East Africa. That's why we're looking at Sudan. That's why we're looking at Ethiopia. I recently relocated offices in Dar es Salaam and in Nairobi. There we went with Sunbird because they provide a infrastructure and flexibility of quality what we were looking for at reasonable prices. So those new kind of service office infrastructure, and we heard it as well, co-working spaces with maybe an airport launch look and feel and the service component attached to it, is what really would ease market entry in several areas in Africa.
So Nena, I know you've worked with a number of global corporates who are looking to enter the West African market. And I know you've seen a number of different approaches. Talk us through what are some of the different approaches and the different successes or otherwise of those.
So I think when you look at the West Africa market, the two biggest markets from a real estate perspective, office market perspective, are Ghana, Accra, and Lagos in Nigeria. And luckily for us, on the advisory side, we've seen those markets, at least in the last 2 years, become more tenant-friendly. So we're seeing rents drop, we're seeing more tenant incentives, we're seeing better quality space, there's an oversupply of space in those markets. So it's easier for me in those markets, just in terms of being able to provide value to the clients that we service. Where I see challenges are in the smaller markets. So you go to Abidjan or you go to the Gambia, Sierra Leone, or Cameroon, and there's just a lack, as he said, there's a lack of quality office space available. And in those markets, what corporates that are coming in are looking for at the initial stages is not a permanent solution yet. They're just feeling out the market, and so flexible working space, co-working space is very important. We're seeing that take off in Nigeria, and we're seeing that take off in Lagos, but I think it really is important for service providers in the smaller markets to really look at that type of flexibility in space, because I think that's really where the growth would happen in those smaller markets initially.
And I think coming to these conferences over the past, 8 years now, the talk has always been about expanding into new markets, opening up new countries, but I think we're at a stage now, especially with some of the uncertainties in some of the countries, where each country can have a very, very different strategy. So, I mean, Kara, you talk about in some countries you're looking to open up new offices, but maybe in some other countries you might be looking to consolidate or even exiting some of those markets. So what's driving some of those decisions?
Yeah, I think it's we've had a few interesting experiences. We've established new presence in places like Chad, N'Djamena, Douala in Cameroon, Juba in South Sudan, where we had to go into a greenfield and either acquire an existing accounting business and turn that into an EY business. And in some cases, like many of you, we've burnt our fingers, so we had to go and close down our office in South Sudan and Juba, because depending on which way the wind blows, there's civil unrest, there's war, there's all sorts of other challenges. And these things are driven by, number one, our clients once again. So typically when we do assurance advisory tax work for a client, they want us to service them across the globe. So we get appointed regionally, and they expect EY to service them in every location where they have a presence. And therefore, at some point, there's a tipping point to say you have to go into those markets. In places like Lubumbashi, we have 100 square meters because of the activity in the mines. But the economy turns on you. Like we saw in Mozambique in the last couple of years, we had a big project lined up in Mozambique. We had to pull the plug on it immediately, stop, and just essentially try and stay above water for 2-3 years. So these things are all driven by, I think, business strategy, which we can control. Then things we can't control, macroeconomic, socio-political stuff. We used to have a huge presence in Zimbabwe and Harare, and as a result of what's been happening in Zimbabwe, we've had to reduce our office from an entire office block to 2 floors. And now that's busy reviving again. But these are all things that, you've got to be flexible, you've got to be agile, you've got to be nimble as well, you've got to try and reduce your costs. And I think going back to the earlier question about what we want landlords to be landlords and to take landlord risk. We can be tenants and we'll take tenant risk. But very often what we find is landlord wants the tenant to take on the landlord risk. They want to transfer that. They charge a European prices for African quality 2 years in advance. And just anecdotally, to comment on that, we did a deal in South Sudan in Juba, negotiated a deal under the African sun, next to a trestle table, for a compound that had WC's toilets installed with no connection to any system. We had to provide our own potable water, so we had the only Ernst & Young branded water tower with our own water. We had to provide our own power. Our IT guys based in Frankfurt thought that Juba is the same as London, so they spent $200,000 on the IT center, which was for 5 people, because we've got global standards. And when we concluded the deal with the landlord said, "Where's the money?" And we said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Where's the suitcase with the cash?" We said, "No, we'll pay you, we have to do a deal, a lease." And he said, he was an ex-military general, and he said, "No, he wants the money cash now." take it or leave it. So we bridged that one way or another, but you know, to your point, governance, compliance, all those sort of things play a role. And the nature of our business means that it's even stricter for us because we're an assurance business. We go through all sorts of vetting and checking processes so that we don't get into the media. And our guys are really strict, and it takes us forever to get through these processes. And when we send a questionnaire to a landlord in Timbuktu that says anti-bribery and corruption due diligence questionnaire, compliance with US SEC regulations, and this is a family-owned little business where he owns one land or one plot. They don't understand, but we can't move forward unless there's compliance. So all these things need to play a role. And I think to your point, what we need is we need a soft landing into these markets. We need somebody to take on the property risk and the landlord risk. We'll pay the rent, but we don't want to play both sides of the table.
I think linking those two comments about the global corporate standards and the international prices for African solutions, where are the biggest gaps in terms of what do you need in a real estate solution versus what's available? Where are the compromise points and what's the solution to it? Sebastian?
First of all, reliability. I can tell you we just left or are in the process of leaving an office in Luanda, which is not a remote place, because we had 1 week no electricity, no water in the building, and continuously over several weeks, several days a week, no infrastructure. And there we paid $91 a square meter net rent. So that tells you something about what we need. We need quality for money, and quality can also mean just a safe and secure office place where everything is working and where you have connected toilets at the end of the day. So that is basically, for the small ramp-up of operations, it does not need to be a fancy office with the corporate branding and agile workplace infrastructure. It needs to work in the end of the day. And in the process, if our business flourishes, then ramping up additional square meter, which is then ideally also in a serviced office environment where you can just book additional desks to wherever you want to grow, even for shorter periods of time. That is basically what we require. Of course, it would be nice to have the double glazed insulated windows and automatic building management system, ideally from Siemens, and adjusting your temperature and lights with an iPhone app. But of course, that is not what we will find in those markets. Hopefully, we'll find it sometime in South Africa or even in Nigeria, where the market is moving as well in terms of quality. But reliability of what we pay for in the first place would be good.
Cool, so we've just got a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions that anyone wants to ask? Yes?
Good afternoon. I'm Gideon Guru from PDM, Nairobi. Recently, I've been involved in leasing an office block, which my employer owns. And we've been engaging a lot of multinationals, and we find that our building checks a lot of their boxes. But the biggest issue we have with our negotiations is the lease term. We have a statutory requirement of a 5-year lease. And you find that most multinationals want a break clause of 3 years. And yet these are multinationals that have been in the same office block in Nairobi for 30 years. So I would like to understand what is the motivation for this and what are their concerns?
So we've seen a move towards shorter lease terms globally as a result of uncertainty, growth, and what's happening in the business. As I said, often what we find is the landlords are not willing to do or play their role and take on landlord risk. And we need to understand what our roles and their roles. We look for flexibility in exiting, expanding, reducing, moving, whatever the case might be. The one thing that I can talk about in our business specifically is because we're a professional services business, we sell hours, or for the moment we still sell hours. We don't know that in 5 years' time that automation or robotics could reduce our workforce by 50%. For us to make a 10-year commitment based on today's headcount is very risky, because we could sit with 50% of the people and then have a baked-in cost that we can't really offset or offload. Our business is also not to sublet, so we don't want to take more space for longer and then try and find the tenants. So that's part of the motivation, stuff that we control that happens with us. The other motivation is the uncertainty. In many of these markets, tomorrow legislation changes, tomorrow there's some kind of other external input or factor, or quite frankly, the location that you chose goes south quite quickly, and you're tied to that for the next 10, 15 years. That's my experience. You know, there could be for manufacturers and others different motivations for that. We've been in some of these markets for many years, and we're still looking for shorter lease terms. We used to sign 10, 15-year leases. We're now looking at anything between 5 and 7 years. 3 years, I think, is probably, if you're a small business and you're trying to establish a presence, that's probably what they're after. But if you have if you're an established entity there, you know, 5 years, in my view, is probably not too big a risk.
Yeah, to add to that, from a Siemens point of view, since you're in Nairobi, and we just relocated Nairobi, our operations in Nairobi are probably 20-30% supported by base business, basically. Whatever products we are putting in the market, smaller orders. And the rest of it, so the majority, so to speak, is project business. So a project can last anything between 3 months and 2 to 3 years. Very seldom projects are longer than that. So with that kind of planning horizon, we need to size our business, and accordingly we need to size our real estate needs. So we are not able to sign a 5 or 10-year lease if we're now having 20% or 30% of the space supported by base business, which would be the base requirement in terms of real estate, and the rest is project. And I don't know, because I'm not sitting on the business side, and even the business side does not know, if there will be another project down the road which will require an additional 3 years of the same workforce. So that is basically the risk consideration when we try to negotiate break clauses, and quite frankly, we are trying to get wherever we can get a break clause in, because it just keeps us flexible and it keeps the risk on our business side as low as possible. For us as well, real estate second largest cost portion. So that is something to be considered.
And just to add to that, I think business strategy actually changes with a lot of multinationals faster than lease terms that you're signing. So, you know, working with one organization in particular, we've just gone through an expansion over the last year, and then the next 18 months we're looking at a contraction. And so when you're tied to a 5 or 10-year lease, it just does not make business strategy, business sense for the multinational, the company. And so even if there are going to be longer leases signed, I think the trend is that corporates would want to have flexibility, and so you're seeing a break clause included in those leases. I believe in Nairobi, Kenya, there is a regulatory requirement, but you can have a license instead of a lease. So you can actually have a shorter period in that market. So maybe that might be a solution for your problem.
Just one more thing just came to my mind. One thing you also need to consider from a tenant point of view is the upcoming changes in IFRS 16. So in the future, we are all forced to capitalize, all of us who are budgeting or who are reporting under IFRS are forced to capitalize the leases on our balance sheet. So it doesn't make any sense for us to capitalize a 5, 7, 10-year lease agreement in a market where we have an uncertain business, because it just costs us a lot of money down the road, and it ties up quite a bit of the balance sheet portion. And additionally, you need to consider, as I said earlier, approval levels within corporate real estate organizations. Approval levels usually for a lease, I can only speak for Siemens here, we're looking at the discounted value of the whole lease. So it's a huge, for you as a landlord, it's not a difference. The rent comes in every month or every year. But for us, it's a huge difference if I need to apply for a 3-year lease of 1 million, let's call it rent each. So that's a 3-year discounted approval level, which basically I can sign. Or if I need to capitalize a 10-year, which would be 10 million, which might be going up to EMEA to headquarters, or which might be going up to global headquarters for approval. So those are all the considerations from a corporate real estate side, which landlords are usually not familiar with, especially in markets where we are facing maybe not a bigger, larger group of tenants.
Okay, I think we are just out of time now. So thank you all for joining us, and especially thank you to the panelists, Nena, Gerard and Sebastian. Thanks.